Mia never imagined that her life would take this turn. At 26, she was an independent, determined woman, but she carried scars that were invisible to the naked eye. From an early age, she learned that the world was not always kind, shaping her into someone strong, but also cautious. A difficult childhood, growing up in a broken home, made Mia a distrustful person, always expecting something to go wrong. Despite this, she always dreamed of having a better life. Intelligent and dedicated, she had talents she never had the chance to fully explore. She wanted to study, to build a career that made her happy, but life did not follow the plans she had drawn. Little by little, responsibilities weighed more than her dreams, and she had to set her desires aside to face reality. Now, pregnant and alone, Mia carried not only the weight of her own frustrations, but also the constant fear of not being enough for the child she was expecting. Her job as a housekeeper in a luxury hotel was exhausting but necessary. Every day, Mia faced the pressure of maintaining the excellence required, even when her body cried out for rest. She endured judgmental glances and malicious whispers about her pregnancy but kept her head held high. She needed that job. There was no room for weakness. Her fear of trusting others only grew, reinforced by the disappointments she had already faced, especially when the father of her child disappeared as soon as he heard the news. While Mia struggled to keep control over her life, Jack seemed to have everything perfectly in order. At 34, he was a millionaire businessman, known as much for his success as for his reserve. With an impeccable posture and an always analytical gaze, Jack was respected and feared in the business world. He built his empire through effort and a strategic coldness that few could match. Behind this flawless image, however, was a man scarred by disillusionment. Jack had learned the hard way that trusting people could be dangerous. A deep betrayal in the past had made him build impenetrable barriers around his heart. Since then, he engaged only superficially, keeping an emotional distance from everyone around him. His life was focused on work, where he felt safe and in control. Even though his fortune provided him with comfort and luxury, there was a void that Jack refused to acknowledge. He convinced himself that he was better off this way. No risks, no expectations, but the silent loneliness was a constant presence, which he masked with long hours of work and ruthless decisions. When their paths crossed, it would be impossible to ignore the clash between these two vastly different worlds. And without realizing it, one's scars might be exactly what would heal the other's wounds. The hotel where Mia worked was a symbol of luxury and perfection, an exclusive refuge for those who could afford the best. Located in a prime area of the city, the imposing building stood out not only for its sophisticated architecture, but also for the aura of exclusivity that surrounded it. Every detail, from the gleaming crystal chandeliers to the pristine marble floors, reflected a cold, untouchable elegance. The hallways were always silent, punctuated only by the discreet sounds of careful footsteps from employees who moved with almost choreographed precision. For the guests, that environment was synonymous with absolute comfort. For the employees, it was a place of constant pressure. The expectation of excellence was non-negotiable, and any mistake could come at a high cost. Mia knew this routine better than anyone. Every morning started early, with the meticulous preparation of the rooms. Everything had to be perfectly arranged. Sheets aligned without a single wrinkle out of place. Amenities positioned with millimetric precision. Every surface polished until it shined. The work was exhausting, and now being pregnant, the physical demands felt even greater. But Mia rarely allowed herself to show fatigue. She knew there was no room for weakness in that environment. The other employees varied between discreet colleagues and judgmental stares. Her pregnancy did not go unnoticed, and Mia felt the weight of whispered assumptions in hallways and service rooms. Even so, she remained professional, focused on her work, ignoring the words that had nothing to do with her dedication. Among luxurious rooms and sophisticated halls, Mia's presence went almost unnoticed, until a series of unexpected circumstances began to change that. And it would all start there, in that setting of apparent perfection, where her life was about to intertwine with someone she never imagined truly meeting. For Mia, each day at the hotel was a silent battle. Pregnancy, which should have been a moment of hope and renewal, had become yet another source of apprehension. She knew the management valued efficiency and discretion above all else, and a pregnant employee with her inevitable physical limitations, did not fit into that ruthless standard. The disapproving looks, the subtle insinuations, and the constant scrutiny from her supervisor made the environment even more suffocating. There was always a latent fear that any mistake, no matter how small, could cost her job, and Mia could not afford to fail. She depended on that salary to support herself, prepare for the baby's arrival, and maintain a stability she had long fought to build. So, she ignored the exhaustion, concealed the discomfort, and continued working with an almost superhuman dedication. It was in this tense atmosphere that Jack arrived at the hotel. His arrival was accompanied by the usual murmurs that surrounded important guests. A millionaire known for his discretion and his strict demands. He would be staying indefinitely, involved in business negotiations that required privacy and attention. His name was spoken in respectful whispers among the employees, and the anticipation surrounding his stay was high. The first meeting between them happened by pure chance and disaster. Mia, rushing to finish a task, entered one of the rooms without realizing Jack was still there. In an awkward gesture, she ended up knocking over a folder of documents he had left on the table, papers scattered across the floor, some sliding under the furniture. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Jack, known for his reserved and cold demeanor, observed the scene with an impassive expression. Mia, aware of the mistake, hurried to pick up the papers, her heart racing. The heavy atmosphere made each second feel eternal, but even in that moment of nervousness, there was something about his presence that made her lift her eyes. And there, for a brief moment, their gazes met. This brief encounter, marked by tension and a disastrous impression, would be just the beginning of a connection neither of them could have predicted. And, although neither knew it yet, that incident would be the first step in transforming their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. After that first disastrous meeting, Mia did everything to keep her distance from Jack. The last thing she needed was more trouble, and crossing paths with such an important guest would only increase the risks. But no matter how hard she tried to avoid him, it seemed like fate had other plans. The meetings began to happen casually, or at least that's what Mia tried to believe. Once, while cleaning one of the hotel's private corridors, she came across Jack leaving a meeting. He passed by her with his usual serious and reserved demeanor, but his eyes lingered on her for a second longer than necessary. There was something in that expression that Mia couldn't interpret, but she felt her heart skip a beat. On another occasion, while organizing the event hall after an executive dinner, she noticed Jack sitting alone on one of the balconies, looking out at the illuminated city. The image of him, solitary, even surrounded by so much luxury, stayed in her mind. There was a subtle melancholy about that man, something that seemed to echo the feeling of isolation Mia carried within herself. Over time, these small moments began to accumulate. Jack, always discreet, seemed to observe her when he thought no one was watching, and Mia, despite all her efforts, started to notice. Sometimes it was a simple nod when they crossed paths in the hallways. Other times, it was the way he seemed to pay attention when she entered a room to do a service. One morning, while tidying up the hotel's indoor garden for an event, a sudden gust of wind scattered some decorative towels across the lawn. Mia quickly bent down to gather them, but her growing belly made the movement more difficult. Without expecting it, a firm hand reached out to help her. She looked up and saw Jack there, with his usual controlled expression, but his gestures were careful, almost gentle. It was at that moment that something began to change. Jack, who always seemed distant, started to approach in subtle ways. He asked brief questions about her work, made occasional comments about the hotel, nothing that crossed the line of formality, but enough for Mia to notice a growing interest. Jack, in turn, couldn't ignore her presence. There was a quiet strength in that woman, something in the way she faced her difficulties without ever losing her dignity. He saw her working tirelessly, even when exhaustion was evident. And, little by little, he found himself increasingly intrigued by her courage and determination. This unexpected closeness, made up of discreet gestures and almost imperceptible moments, began to create a connection neither of them could deny, even though both tried to. As much as those casual encounters seemed harmless, Mia couldn't ignore the discomfort growing inside her. Jack was polite, helpful in a discreet way, but he was still an important guest, someone very distant from her reality. And more than that, Mia knew she couldn't afford to get involved. Not after everything she had already been through. Her pregnancy had already completely changed her life. She had learned, the hardest way possible, the price of trusting the wrong people. The father of her child had disappeared as soon as he found out, and since then, Mia had not let anyone get too close. Her heart was protected by a wall built from disappointments and fear. Now, all that mattered was ensuring a safe future for the baby. Any distraction could put that at risk. And Jack, he was a dangerous distraction. His presence started affecting her in ways Mia didn't want to admit. The attentive gaze, the contained kindness, the way he seemed to notice when she was tired or needed help. They were small details, but they made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. And that scared her. Every time their eyes met, Mia felt that spark, but she quickly forced herself to look away, reminding herself of all the reasons to keep her distance. He was a powerful man, from a completely different world than hers. And even if there was some kindness behind that serious facade, Mia knew she couldn't allow herself to build any expectations. On the other hand, Jack also fought against his own feelings. From the first time he crossed paths with Mia, something about her had caught his attention. It wasn't just her delicate beauty, or the way she carried herself. It was the silent strength, the determination in her eyes, even when she seemed exhausted. He tried to convince himself it was just curiosity, a fleeting admiration. But as the days passed, he realized he was spending too much time thinking about her. He started to notice her presence even before seeing her, recognizing her hurried steps, her soft voice giving instructions to other staff members. Jack wasn't used to this kind of distraction. Since the disillusionment he'd experienced in the past, he had built a life based on control, both in business and in his emotions. Relationships were a complication he had learned to avoid, and he was convinced it was better that way. But Mia made that control slip through his fingers. He found himself increasingly tempted to get closer, but her resistance was clear. Jack noticed how Mia avoided prolonged contact, how she always kept a safe distance. That only fueled his curiosity, because he knew how to recognize fear when he saw it. And he knew that, behind that strength, there were scars she was trying to hide. Both were trapped in a silent battle against their own feelings. Mia, trying to protect herself from another disappointment, and Jack, fighting against the growing need to break down the barriers she had built. This unspoken tension hung between them, increasingly difficult to ignore. Mia was working the afternoon shift when fatigue seemed to take over her body. The busy hotel routine, coupled with the pregnancy that was starting to take its toll, made every movement harder. She tried to maintain her professional demeanor, but the pressure was becoming increasingly unbearable. Her stomach churned from the effort, and a slight dizziness began to settle in. She was alone in the part of the hotel where guests rarely passed, which made her feel even more isolated. As Mia tried to continue her work, organizing rooms and adjusting the details the clients requested, her vision started to blur. She groped the wall beside her, searching for balance, but her feet felt heavy, and her breathing became shallow. The discomfort grew, and before she could realize it, she leaned forward, causing an object to fall. She tried to steady herself on a nearby table, but the strength of her body failed, causing her to stumble. Just as she was about to fall, a firm hand caught her. It was Jack. He was there, in the hallway, returning from a business meeting. Fate, as always, seemed to have a curious way of bringing people together. He observed her for a moment, noticing Mia's pale face and the difficulty with which she tried to stand. Without hesitation, he steadied her, helping her sit in a nearby chair. Something in his eyes showed concern, but he remained silent, just watching as she tried to catch her breath. Mia, still embarrassed by the scene, tried to regain her composure, but exhaustion was evident. He noticed how fragile she seemed, and it hit him unexpectedly. He knew she was pregnant, but now, in the face of the situation, it all felt more real, more tangible. Her pregnancy was something he'd vaguely heard in a previous conversation, but he never imagined how much it affected her life. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, not taking his eyes off her. Mia, with a weak smile, tried to calm herself. "Yes, just a little tired." Jack wasn't convinced, but decided not to press the issue. He knew what the weight of responsibility felt like, and how she seemed to be dealing with something beyond the strength of an ordinary person. He began to notice a new facet of her, something he hadn't noticed in their previous interactions. The strength with which she tried to move forward, the dedication with which she worked to maintain appearances, despite the internal struggle she was clearly facing. "I didn't know you were pregnant," he said, his tone softer than Mia had expected. Mia hesitated before responding, the fear of being judged still present in her gaze. She didn't want to appear vulnerable, didn't want anyone to see how difficult her life was becoming. She had never known how to trust others, but somehow, the care Jack showed seemed genuine. She looked at him, not knowing how to react to his attentive presence. "Yes, I'm pregnant," she said softly, looking away. The silence between them lasted a few seconds, but it was a silence heavy with meaning. Jack felt something he couldn't identify, a mix of compassion, respect, and, unexpectedly, something more. He didn't know what it was, but he knew that something in his perception of Mia had shifted in that moment. There was something more to her, something that touched him deeply. He began to think that maybe, even in his coldness and detachment, he had failed to see the layers of a person as complex and strong as Mia. After a few moments, he pulled back slightly, still maintaining the distance of someone who didn't want to invade another's space, but already feeling somewhat responsible. He was beginning to realize the magnitude of what she was facing, and, against his distant nature, something inside him seemed to want to protect Mia, even if it was just through small, silent gestures. He looked at her once more, trying to convey somehow that she wasn't alone in that moment. "If you need anything, let me know. Don't hesitate to ask for help." Mia looked up, more surprised than she expected. Something in that phrase and in his gaze seemed sincere, a feeling she rarely experienced. Deep down, she knew Jack wasn't like the other men who had crossed her path. He didn't look at her with judgment, but with genuine concern. However, her caution still kept her from fully lowering her guard. After all, she had seen what happens when you give yourself to someone who doesn't truly care. As Jack walked away, he still felt a strange urge to be closer to her, to do more than just offer words. He was touched by Mia's vulnerability and the strength she radiated, even in moments of weakness. Something inside him began to question the way he saw the world and relationships, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly connected to another person, in a way he couldn't explain. Mia, on the other hand, sat there, breathing more calmly. Jack's presence had disoriented her in an unexpected way, but it had also made her reflect. Maybe he wasn't as distant as she thought. Maybe in some way, he was willing to support her, something she didn't know how to handle. As the weeks passed, Mia and Jack's routine became increasingly intertwined in unexpected ways. Jack, who had seemed so distant at first, began to find subtle ways to be more present in her life. Nothing intrusive, but enough for him to notice the silent battle Mia faced every day. He, who had always had control over his life and his business, began to realize there was something deeper and more complex in the life of someone who fights alone, day after day, for what few manage to attain: survival and dignity. Their interactions began to occur more frequently and naturally. When Jack was at the hotel, he would find ways to pass by the area where Mia was, without being obvious, just observing how she handled the pressures of her job. Sometimes, a simple shared glance between them during breakfast made the silence between them more comfortable. Other times, he would pause to talk to her about something unrelated to work, allowing her to relax for a moment, breaking the tense routine she lived in. Mia, who until then had become accustomed to keeping her guard up, began to realize that Jack wasn't just trying to be polite. There was something more. Perhaps, in fact, a genuine curiosity about her life. Slowly, she started to open up more, even if cautiously, sharing small pieces of herself that she would never reveal to anyone else. In one of these conversations, while she was organizing the hotel lobby and Jack watched from a distance, she spoke about her difficult childhood, the nights she would wake up in fear, not knowing how she would pay the bills at the end of the month, and the weight of the fear of being alone in the world. He listened in silence, not rushing to interrupt. When she finished, he simply looked at her, wordlessly, but with an expression that, to her, said more than any comment could say. He understood her, perhaps more than she imagined. On the other hand, Jack was also starting to open up. He, who had always kept distant, focused only on his business and his own pain, began to talk more about what had marked him over the years: his disillusionment with love, his failed marriage, and the abandonment he had felt were subjects he never thought he would share with anyone. But somehow, with Mia, the words came out spontaneously, as if the connection between them was stronger than he could comprehend. He no longer wanted to live isolated in the world of business, as if nothing else mattered but money and productivity. Mia's presence made him rethink his view of life, and perhaps even of love. He began to question what really mattered, and whether the things he had lost could somehow be recovered, or if he had already reached a point where nothing would make sense anymore. These exchanges, small at first, but of great significance, began to create stronger bonds between them. Mia felt uncomfortable, but at the same time, something inside her wanted to believe in Jack's unexpected kindness. She started to trust him in a way she never believed possible, especially concerning her pregnancy, an aspect of her life she had always tried to hide from the world. Jack, in turn, showed gestures of care that Mia never imagined receiving. He would watch her while she worked, and whenever possible, he would try to ease her routine, making sure she didn't overwhelm herself further with the weight of work. He became someone she could count on, and that was something new for her, a feeling she didn't know how to handle. But the most important thing was his care for the baby. Jack began to worry about what she needed, even what might be best for the child she was expecting. He accompanied her to medical appointments when he could, and always asked how she was feeling. Even though he wasn't a very expressive man, the small things he did didn't go unnoticed. These moments became even more intense when the two of them began talking about their dreams. Mia revealed her innermost desires, those things she had kept hidden out of fear of being disappointed. She spoke about the future, about the plans she had before her life had changed completely, and how she felt that despite everything, there was still a spark of hope in her heart. Jack, surprisingly, became her confidant. He listened to her patiently, and with the attention of someone who truly cared. When Mia talked about how love seemed distant to her, something that seemed impossible to achieve amid her reality, Jack, in a discreet way, showed her that maybe there was something more waiting for her, something she no longer needed to seek alone. And so, from conversation to conversation, gesture to gesture, the respect and admiration that grew between them began to form a solid foundation for something deeper. Mia no longer saw Jack as the cold, distant man she had met at the beginning. He began to become someone she could trust, a man who, despite trying to hide his own wounds, was there to help, to support, without asking for anything in return. And for Jack, Mia was no longer just the pregnant maid he had met by chance. She was someone he respected, someone he admired for the strength with which she faced life's adversities. He began to realize that perhaps what he had been searching for most in his life was precisely that genuine connection he was experiencing with her, something he hadn't imagined possible, but that, little by little, was winning him over. The bonds between them were growing stronger, and a new dynamic was forming. With each passing day, the distance between their hearts was shrinking, and trust was beginning to become the foundation of something that, although still not entirely clear, was already undeniable to both of them. Jack began to realize that Mia, with all her strength and courage, could be the key to something he didn't even know he was looking for, the possibility of building a life together with someone, perhaps even a family. The sun was already beginning to set when Jack entered the hotel, his heart pounding with an intensity he couldn't control. In the past few days, something inside him had changed. He felt as if Mia's presence, with her strength, vulnerability, and the connection that had formed between them, had transformed him in ways he hadn't expected. He looked at her from afar as she worked, her hands quick and steady as she organized the entire environment. The image of Mia, pregnant and doing everything she could to stay on her feet and move forward, touched Jack in a way he couldn't fully explain. No matter how much he tried to resist it, he knew his feelings for her were no longer just admiration or respect. He no longer saw Mia as the pregnant maid he had met at the beginning. She was so much more than that. She was the woman who, without realizing it, had made him reflect on his own life, on the choices he had made, and on how much he had lost by shutting himself off from love. Mia was not just a strong woman. She was someone who awakened emotions in him that had been buried for a long time. Something in his soul told him that he could no longer let this connection slip away. It was in that moment that he knew, with the certainty only the heart can bring, that he didn't want to live without her anymore. He needed Mia. More than that, he wanted to be the man who would support her, who would take care of her and the child she was expecting. An idea formed in his mind, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he knew exactly what he needed to do. He didn't just want to be by her side. He wanted to be a permanent part of her life. That night, as the hotel grew quieter, Jack asked Mia to meet him in the garden, a peaceful and serene place where they used to spend some time together. She looked at him with surprise, but accepted the invitation, not knowing what awaited her. When she arrived, she found Jack already waiting for her, looking at her with an expression that overflowed with sincerity and determination. She felt something change in the air, as if it were the moment of an important turning point. Jack took a step toward her, and his voice sounded firm, but laden with emotion. He began to talk about everything they had been through up to that point, about how Mia, with her courage and strength, had become an essential part of his life, and how she, unknowingly, had made him remember what it meant to live and feel. He spoke about how she and the baby had earned a special place in his heart, and how he no longer wanted to live without them in his life. Every word seemed heavy, as if he were sharing the most intimate part of his being. "I don't just want to be by your side, Mia. I want to build something real with you. I want to take on the role of father to your child. I want to be the man you deserve, the one you can always trust. I want you to know that, if you give me this chance, I will give everything I have to make sure your life and our child's life are as good as possible." Mia looked at him, speechless, as her heart raced within her chest. The request he was making was something she had never imagined, something that seemed so distant and impossible when she had started her journey in that hotel. She, who had always been afraid of surrendering, now found herself facing a decision that could completely change her destiny. But the sincerity in Jack's gaze, the way he spoke about their future, made her feel, for the first time, truly seen and understood. Jack stepped forward, holding her hand gently, but with a determination that didn't go unnoticed. "I know you have your fears, Mia. I see it in your eyes every day, but I don't want you to face this alone anymore. If you allow me, I'll be here by your side, not just as a man in love, but as someone who will protect you and our child, no matter what happens." The emotion in the air was palpable, and Mia, although still with a heart divided, felt the strength of that moment. Jack's words had touched something inside her, something she had kept hidden for so long. She knew that this gesture wasn't just a marriage proposal, it was the promise of a shared life, of support she had never imagined having. She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, and deep within her heart, she felt something change. The pain of the past, the fears that had haunted her for so long, seemed to finally start dissipating, making way for a new hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, Jack was the man with whom she could finally build the life she had always dreamed of, beside someone who, at last, truly cared. Jack, still holding her hand, waited for a response. He knew this was a moment of vulnerability, of risk, but also of immense sincerity. He couldn't go back. More than anything, he wanted to be the man she needed, the man she deserved. And Mia, with her heart full of conflicting emotions, looked at him and, for the first time, felt that maybe, just maybe, she could believe in what he was offering. The silence between them lingered in the air, charged with a soft and inevitable tension. Mia looked at Jack, her eyes misted with emotion, and the sight of him there in front of her was enough to make the last veil of doubt fade away. She didn't know exactly what the future would hold for them, but, in that moment, everything seemed possible. The fear that had paralyzed her for so long, the fear of surrendering, began to fade as she looked into his eyes and saw once again the sincerity and commitment in his words. He truly was willing to give her and the baby a different life, a life of love, support, and trust. With a slight smile, Mia squeezed his hand, feeling the security he offered. She knew this was the beginning of something new, something she had never dared to dream, a future in which, alongside Jack, she could build the life she had always imagined for herself and the child she carried in her womb. "Yes," she whispered, the word leaving her lips with a mixture of emotion and certainty. "Yes, I accept." The simple yet profound words marked the moment when everything changed. Jack, hearing her answer, felt the weight of his own decision dissipate, and relief washed over him. He knew he was doing the right thing. With a genuine smile and eyes shining with happiness, he enveloped her in a hug, sealing the commitment they both had made for the rest of their lives. The hotel, with its luxurious corridors and refined rooms, now seemed like a secondary backdrop to the grandeur of the moment. It was no longer the golden walls of the hotel that mattered, but what was to come, a new life, a new family. Their love, although still young, was already strong enough to face any challenge life would throw at them. True love often emerges in the most unexpected circumstances. It doesn't wait for us to be perfect, or for life to be simple, but finds us precisely when we need its strength the most. Jack and Mia learned that courage doesn't just lie in moving forward, but in allowing oneself to live in vulnerability, to embrace imperfections, and most importantly, to open the heart to the other. Each challenge faced, each doubt overcome, led them to understand that true happiness lies in building something solid, based on respect, trust, and mutual dedication. When the fear of surrendering gives way to trust in the other, great transformations can happen. Love is not just a feeling, it's a commitment, a daily choice. And in the end, it's what gives us the strength to move forward, no matter what the future holds. May everyone find the courage to live this love, without reservations, without fear, but with the certainty that together, we can overcome any adversity.